This is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it's queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So let's look at the structure of this poem. So there are 4 stanzas in this poem. Each line has 8 syllables, and also each line has a syncopation pattern, so it goes unstressed, stress, unstressed, and so on and so forth. So that means it's iambic. And since there are 8 syllables per line and there are 4 stressed syllables per line, that makes it a iambic tetrameter. So there is rhymes going on within this poem. So it's a interesting pattern. So if you look at the first stanza, no, though, and snow all rhyme, but here does not. But if you look at the next stanza, is queer and near and year. So that also rhymes with here. So the third line, that rhymes with the next stanza's main rhyme sequence. So it's here, queer, near, and year. So the pattern continues as it goes to lake on the third line. It goes to shake, mistake, and flake. And then third line, sweep, goes to deep, keep, and then sleep and sleep. This pattern does not follow onto the 4th stanza, most likely because that's the last stanza, so it can't refer to another stanza, and also because the last 2 lines are repeated, so it can't be different. So let's look at the attitude and tone of the speaker. So since there's a lot of nature descriptions in this poem, especially with the descriptions of easy wind and downy flake, and the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. It gives off a very whimsical sound and tone of the speaker, as well as passionate, because if you ended up not liking the woods, then you would not be speaking about the woods in this way, which kind of shows how passionate and interested the speaker is in the woods. It also seems captivating as well. Also, since it's like it is the darkest evening of the year, so it's dark, it's cold, and it's also snowing, so it's got to be freezing, and also in the winter there usually aren't any animals out, and there's also no sound, like the speaker says. The only other sound is the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. There's no other sound in the woods, so it kind of emphasizes how lonely he is. So the tone also gives off a hint of loneliness and depression as well, because of how lonely it is, and also because of the "and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." It's also it seems depressing how far away it seems that he's going to be able to fall asleep. So let's look at literary devices. So in this first line, whose woods these are, I think I know. Usually when you would say this line, it would be, I think I know whose woods these are. So that reversed sense of it is called syntax. So originally just alone. This part I think I know shows how unsureness and like somewhat confused and like confusion. So when it's reversed, it seems like more emphasized. So I think that's the purpose of the syntax, to show how unsure he is. So when down on this second stanza, when it says, "My little horse must think it's queer," must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. So must think it's queer is something that's mostly human, so it's personification, because horses usually don't think of things as queer. So I think the purpose of this is to show kind of how lonely the speaker is, in that he's thinking of the horse as another person, because there are no other people around. It's just the horse. The farmhouse could mean a farmhouse, or it could also it's also a symbol for people and civilization. That also emphasizes how lonesome the speaker feels and how he actually is. And the darkest evening just refers to the darkest day of the year, which is December 21st or 22nd. So down here, it's he just refers to the horse. Again, this is also personification down here to ask if there's some mistake, just personification. The word sweep down here, that's as an onomatopoeia. It kind of, it also uses a little bit of imagery as well, to show and kind of help you visualize and like hear how it actually sounded, just the sweeping sound of the wind and the downy snow, but nothing else. It kind of emphasizes like the silence of the woods that he's feeling. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. When you say this, there's usually a natural pause in between this. The caesura, so the caesura kind of like puts emphasis on how dark and how deep the woods actually feel. So the dark and the deep could literally mean dark and deep, but it could also mean how it's like depressing and how it's so like mysterious and really lonely. Then and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. This is just repetition, line just repeated over and over twice. So in the first line, it seems to be a denotation of the statement. So, and miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go just refers to the distance that they actually have to go, and before I sleep, before he actually sleeps. And then the second line, it's more of a connotation feel. So it's miles to go before I sleep. So miles to go seems like it's referring to life in general. Before I sleep, and this refers to death. So the second line could be a metaphor for life and death, as the first line is a denotation of the statement. The purpose of this is to show his depressing situation in this exact situation of his, and then also to show how it's not as different from how he feels about life in general, about how he can't it's going to take so long until he's dead. This could also bring up the topic of suicide, which we'll talk about a little later on. So the basic plot of this poem is that the speaker stops in the woods of another man's on a snowy evening. He takes in the silence and he wants to stay longer, but the horse is getting impatient. He notices, and he's reminded of his obligations back at the village, as well as the long journey that it'll take him to get back before they can go to sleep. So the themes of this poem are one, the literal sense of it, talking about nature and how quiet nature is during the winter time, and how captivating it can be in its beauty. Another theme is isolation, so how the speaker feels about being in the woods rather than in the village. He would rather stay in the freezing cold on the darkest day of the year, where it's the woods are dark and deep, but he finds them lovely because it gives him an excuse to not go back to the village right away, so that he can delay his promises and his obligations to civilization and society. And there's also a huge sense of death and a little bit of suicide as well. So especially on the last two lines, in Miles to Go Before I Sleep and Miles to Go Before I Sleep, the last line, Miles to Go Before I Sleep, seems like it's going to take me a really long time for me to live until that one moment when I get to die. So he's referring to he wants to die like he wants to go to sleep right now. So um, it seems like he's thinking about suicide. How this poem is American. So, a common pattern in American poetry is a contrast between um, civilization and nature, like the woods or the clearing. There are very specific contrasts in American literature, and in this poem, it shows the contrast between the road, where the narrator is traveling, how it connects marketplace and marketplace to marketplace, which promotes community and culture, while the white silence of the woods is like none of the normal limitations of the world seem to apply to anyone who's there. So it's a very big contrast in that sense.